If you guys haven't heard by now, yeah, this is the Nick Frazier Podcast, and you're getting the best genuine content out there. Right, fellas?
Sure.
Agreed.
Welcome back, everybody, to another episode of the Nick Frazier Podcast. I have on a really awesome guest today. His name is Jim Wyatt. A lot of people might know him from the sports scene here in Nashville. He's a Nashville native through and through. Jim, how are you today?
I'm doing great, Nick. Hope you're having a good day.
I am. I'm very ecstatic for you to come on the podcast. You know, this is a part of the Nashville sports series that I talked to you about off the podcast. So greatly appreciate you coming on, and we're going to get into it a little bit. We're going to talk a little bit of your journey with the industry and, you know, just kind of what led you to where you're at now. You know, your job with the Titans and working for them. And I assume that's kind of one of your big dream jobs, I assume, right?
Yeah, I never thought it would develop like it did. I mean, I kind of got into the sports writing business for out of college. Found out that's what I wanted to do really late in my college experience, and started working for the school newspaper, and then transitioned into working part-time at the Tennessee many years ago. Worked another full-time job at the time. We can get into more of that if you want to, but when I was covering the Titans for the Tennessee, I never really thought I would end up working for the team, but that's kind of the way things happen. That's the way, the business, the industry kind of led me, and it's been a good career choice for me. I enjoy doing it, covering, working for the hometown NFL team, which I never thought would happen. I was growing up in town.
Yeah. That was one thing that really stood out to me, is that I wanted somebody to have on as a guest that would really represent Nashville in the best way possible. And I was like, I mean, Jim Wyatt just seems like the number one person to be on the podcast for it, because, being a Nashville native, it to me, it rings true to home. Like, it's cool to represent your own city and your own industry, Yeah,
and I've considered myself very lucky because, I know a lot of people that cover the Titans, here in town or from somewhere else. I've got a lot of friends across the league, that are working, covering NFL teams, and, very rare when one of them is a native of that city. I was born in Nashville, went to grade school here, started off at Christ the King, and then my family moved. I went to St. Henry's, great, for 4th through 8th, and then I went to Father Ryan, and never dreamed then. I grew up a fan of the Buffalo Bills because I loved OJ, back in the 70s. It's tough to say that now after what kind of trend happened in his life, but I was a Bills fan in Nashville. I never thought there'd be an NFL team here in this city. And then, went to college at the University of Tennessee. I'm a Vanderbilt fan. I got a Vanderbilt hat on, you see now. And part of the reason I'm a Vanderbilt fan is, again, I'm a Nashville native. Father Ryan at the time was on Elliston Place, right across the street from Vanderbilt. My dad went to Vanderbilt Law School, started games 7 or 8 years old. I'm stuck with Vandy. And for the longest time, the only thing in town was, Vanderbilt football and basketball. The baseball program wasn't much way back in the day. The Sounds were in town, the Nashville Knights, small college, but you didn't have the Predators, and you didn't have the Titans. And so it just got, I was fortunate that at the time when I got out of college, and started working for the Tennessean in the 90s, was a time, during that time, professional teams started coming to the city, and got a big break in 99 when the Titans came to town, and had an editor that believed in me because I'd worked part-time at the paper for many years up until that point, and had worked full-time a couple of years. And I said, hey, how would you like to cover the Titans and the Predators? And I didn't know anything about hockey. I mean, I actually, I'm not lying when I tell you that I bought a Hockey for Dummies book, and then I had buddies of mine, John Glennon, who's been in this scene for a long time. A guy named David Beauclair, who's covered the Predators for a long time. Those guys literally taught me about the sport of hockey. I knew about football, so I covered, the Titans and Predators both for a couple of years. The Titans got so big that I spent most of my time covering the Titans, in 99 and 2000 before, I got a chance to be the beat guy for the paper. And then I've been exclusively Titans since, and worked for the newspaper from 2001 worked for the newspaper covering the Titans from 99 to 2014. But after being, the beat guy for 2001 to 2014, the Titans came to me and, asked if I was interested in working for the team. Again, it's not something I can say that I ever, had on my bucket list, because I'm a newspaper guy. I grew up in the newspaper industry. I loved working for the newspaper, and working for the team was really against anything that I, had in mind, because it's a different job. But made the transition, and certainly there have been, adjustments I've had to make in how I cover the team and how I handle things on a day-to-day basis. But it's been a great job for me. I've been really lucky. People have been very good to me. I love working for the Titans, and I love all the people I've been able to meet and develop friendships with along the way because of that opportunity.
Yeah, absolutely. And you gave out a lot of information right there, Jim, and there's a lot to cover on all that, because, you mentioned you're a big newspaper guy, and, you mentioned way before you got into all this that you were a two-job kind of guy when you got into working in the newspaper industry. What was that other job? What was it? Was it kind of hard to balance both things when you had a passion for one thing and maybe not a passion for the other job?
Yeah, that's a good question, and this is really kind of shows you how I had to pay my dues, to kind of get to where I am today. Because I have a lot of people that will ask me, straight out of college, hey, I'd love to have your job. What can I do to get it? And I don't want to say anybody should follow my path, because my path was a long one to get to where I am, but it just shows you that I was willing to work to try to get to a job that I wanted to have, and that was having the best job at the paper. And then I now consider myself to have the best job in Nashville, writing for the Titans. But when I mentioned I went to the University of Tennessee. I changed my father was a criminal court judge in Nashville. Was a general sessions judge for a while, and then he was a criminal court judge after that. He was a judge for 43 years in Nashville. And so growing up, I had kind of law in my background. I thought maybe I wanted to follow in my father's footsteps and maybe go down, that path. He was a police officer first, and then FBI agent, and then he eventually started working, got himself in a position where he became a judge. But my first major was criminal justice in college. And I have to say, if I'm going to give you my full path, I actually started off at UT Martin, and then I transferred up to UT Knoxville. So when I started off at UT Martin, I was a criminal justice major, and I liked it, but it wasn't really a passion. I just didn't really, after a year, I realized that that's not what I wanted to do. I switched my major to broadcasting at that point. I knew I liked sports and thought, maybe I would try to get into, broadcasting or doing something maybe on the radio. This is long before podcasts and long before what the media scene looks like now. But I did that for a while and liked it. But then, still, I don't know if it was necessarily what I had in mind. I transferred to Knoxville, enjoyed my time up there. Along the way, I changed my major again. I kind of knew at that point that, hey, I like to write. I thought I might write children's books. If I've got two kids, my daughter Sydney went to Father Ryan with her, and I used to make up stories to them, bedtime stories about a frog named Bert. And so I used to tell them Bert stories when they were kids. And I thought maybe, okay, I may write children's books. After they kind of encouraged me to do it, I enjoy doing that. So changed my major to English. I took some children's classes, write children's books, took a lot of other English literature classes, and that became my major. And I thought, if I don't get into sports, maybe I, write children's books, write books, do something along those lines. But right before I got out of school at UT, I thought, I might give a shot working for the school newspaper. The Daily Beacon was the school newspaper, still is the school newspaper at UT Knoxville today. I wrote maybe 3 or 4 stories, for the Beacon, got a couple of bylines. And I think just from that short experience, my last semester in school, I thought, this is something I would think I'd like to pursue when I got out of school. I didn't know what else I was going to do. So I was really just looking for something that maybe I could strive for. I had worked a part-time job during the summers when I was in college at a place called the Register of Deeds. It was in the courthouse. Again, I mentioned my father was a judge. He worked in the courthouse. He knew Felix Z. Wilson, who was the Register of Deeds at the time. He got me a summer job where I, just did odds and ends stuff, helped the general public with property deeds and mortgages and tax liens and anything related to real estate. And when I got out of college, they hired me full time. It was a 40-hour job. I worked 8 to 4:25 every day. And then I started working at the newspaper part time. And I'm not talking about I came in and started writing stories. I came in and answered the phone there, and I took hole-in-ones, and I took bowling scores over the phone, and I covered, took track scores. That's what it was called, agate. I was kind of an agate clerk, and people would call in on the phone. This is Tennessean, and what sport are you calling about? I'm calling about girls tennis, and I would take the DCA FRA tennis match, and I would take, again, hole-in-ones from McCabe or Percy Warner or Two Rivers. I would take bowling scores from Strike and Spare. I took track and field from, you name the school, and I did it. And I did that for a long time. Got my foot in the door. They let me start writing short blurbs for the newspaper. My byline didn't appear on it. It was a graph about each game. It was a time when instead of doing just the agate, we write, Ron Slay, I covered, high school sports. Ron Slay scored 27 points, and John Henderson scored 21 points, and Pearl Cone beat Whites Creek and Odell Bradley in overtime to advance to the district title game. It's just short blurbs like that. And so they let me do that. And then, they said, okay, well, this guy can write a little bit. He's done a little bit better than maybe some other people we've had do this. Let's let him start to cover maybe a game here or there. So while I was working full time at the Register of Deeds, 40 hours a week, I was working part time for the paper, working a lot of times 24, 30, 40 hours a week. I was working 75, 80 hours a week for 4 or 5 years. And that newspaper job started developing to where, okay, he did a pretty good job covering these high school games. Let's let him cover some small college. Wasn't glamorous. I covered my first byline was on the sailboat race. It's called the Tennessee Regatta. It was a Tennessean sponsored sailboat race in Old Hickory Lake. It was probably about 38 degrees in the middle of March, and I'm covering a boat, covering a race where in the middle of nowhere. I covered walking horse celebration in Shelbyville, Tennessee. Covered a lot of stuff that nobody wanted to do, to be honest with you. But the more I did that, the more experience I got. They gave me a chance to do more, and then I worked for 6 years, full time at this Register of Deeds in the courthouse. I worked from 8 to 4:25. I'd leave there, be at the paper on Broadway at 5 o'clock. Work from 5 to 11, 5 to midnight. A lot of nights, and then I'd get up and do it all over again. So I did that for 5, 6 years. Finally got a chance, to work full time at the paper as the Tennessean, prep coordinator. I was in charge of all the high school sports coverage. Had some other people I worked with then, and just kind of paid my dues. And then the Titans and Predators moved to town in the late 90s. They gave me a break and, said, hey, how would you like to cover again the Titans? I did it, and I kind of guess the rest is history. But it took a long time to get there, and a lot of long hours and a very patient wife and understanding, of what I wanted to do and my dream. And I finally got a chance to cover it, and I never dreamed I'd be covering an NFL team again in my own backyard.
Yeah. That was the next thing I was going to ask you is, did you have any aspirations to go in any other markets that you possibly wanted to cover? Like, did you feel like to a certain extent, because Nashville didn't have as many professional sport teams at the time, like, did you ever get discouraged that your possibility of covering something in this, area would be non-existent and you'd have to look elsewhere?
I really didn't. I mean, to be honest with you, I mean, I never, I love covering high school sports, whether it was Tennessee, whether it was basketball or football or wrestling or track and field, I loved it. I mean, because people, love seeing you at events. You got all the access you wanted. I got to meet, it's crazy, just some of the players I covered, back in the day in high school, and now seeing how their college careers went and how they've, are big names in our community in Nashville now. That was fun to me. It was fun when I got the chance to cover, some NCAA tournaments that were in town. And I never back then, felt like I was lucky to have a job as a sports writer and wasn't even thinking about covering professional sports. I didn't think I was cut out for that or would ever have a chance to do that. Again, these people come into business now and they've been to journalism school and they've had internships and had all kinds of opportunities to prove themselves. I just kind of got into it late and learned on the job. I didn't think I was worthy of covering an NFL team anywhere. And kind of, again, felt like I got lucky when the Titans came to town and kind of, had people that looked out for me. I covered I talked to you about how I didn't know a lot about hockey and how people helped me when I started covering the Titans, that I didn't know anything about the salary cap or how contracts worked or just how to deal with these professional players. I covered 17, 16, 17-year-old kids, in high school tournaments. So, Jeff Legwald is a guy who used to work in this market. He now works for ESPN in Denver. Paul Kuharski, who's been, in Nashville for a long time covering the Titans. Those guys were covering the Titans when they were the Oilers and they moved from Houston to Tennessee. And they, again, showed me the ropes on how to do that job. And, if not for them, I never would have gotten into a position where I was able to be successful. And then just kind of learned on the go. Had good sports editors, a guy named Mike Jones, Bob McClellan, worked under guys like David Clymer and Joe Biddle and Larry Woody at the Tennessee, and a guy named Mike Organ, who's still with the paper. All those people kind of helped me develop at a time where I didn't really know what I was doing. And then just after all the years, I finally got to the point where I felt like, okay, I can do this. And then, my mindset was I was just going to try to work harder than anybody else. I never considered myself to be the best writer out there. I never considered myself to be the smartest guy in the room, but I did always think I was going to outwork everybody. And I, in some ways, still kind of have that mindset today. I think if you treat people well, if you work hard, if people know you're not trying to trick them, then I think you can get a long ways doing the job. And that's what I've tried to do over the years. And the timing was good for me to have the Titans come to town and to be at the paper. And golly, now cover the team 22, 23 years later, or whatever it is, longer than that. It's hard to believe how much time has flown by.
Yeah, no, I definitely agree with you. I love the statement you made about just hard work goes a long way, because in life it truly does. And I feel like that kind of gets overlooked because everybody wants that dream job immediately after they get out of school. And life doesn't work like that. It really doesn't.
No, it doesn't. I mean, you really do have to pay your dues. And I've seen a lot of people, young writers, whatever business you're in, kind of people come and go, because, they get impatient or because they don't want to do the dirty work or don't want to work weekends. I mean, you're not going to make it long in sports if you don't want to work weekends or nights. I mean, that's when most of these games are played. And granted, me having this job, it's required a lot of sacrifices. I've missed. My family goes to every Titans game. My wife, my son, My daughter Sydney, I mentioned earlier. My son Rhett, who went to Ryan as well. I mean, they've gone to they go to all the Titans games, but I've never been to a Titans game with them because I'm in the press box, and so I missed that. I mean, I have to travel. I'm traveling to the combine right now in Indianapolis. I'll be gone for a week. I just got back from a 2-week trip where I went to the Senior Bowl, to the Pro Bowl, to the Super Bowl. I was gone for 15 days. Those are the kind of things that's great. I love doing it. Don't get me wrong. But people to pay me to cover events like that's great, but that's time away from your family.
Right.
You got to make stuff. You got to do your dream was not to cover the Tennessee Regatta boat race or to cover the Tennessee walking horses or to take calls over the phone. But you got to do that kind of stuff to make you appreciate the big stuff. And I think that's my best advice to people is you got to be patient and you got to pay your dues and you got to take your lumps. And you have good days and bad days, but it's worth it if you hang in there.
Yeah, I 100% agree with you. I'm kind of dealing with that stuff now in life. I'm kind of paying my dues and trying to get into the industry. But now, I mean, that's the one thing that I realized because me growing up as a kid in Nashville, I remember reading your stuff in the Tennessean, like that weekend, my parents would always get the Sunday paper and I was always read the sports section. And I saw Jim Wyatt's article and I'd always read it. And I'd always get either the British report. We'll get into that in a second because that's become like an anticipated thing every week when it comes to sports in Nashville. You're waiting on the Titans. What are they going to wear? And you got Jim Wyatt's British report. And it seems like, we'll get into it now. The Titans media team, they seem to have really caught on to your British report because they've turned it into a whole social media phenomenon. Like, what are your initial thoughts about that?
It's kind of crazy of all the stuff I do during the course of the week, and the thing people seem to be most interested in is what the team's wearing on Sundays and what color breeches they're wearing. I think it's really funny how that's taken off, and that started when I started working for the team in 2015. I thought, what it'd be cool to kind of put out there during the week what the team is wearing, and I think when I first started doing it, I think I'd say, the Titans are going to wear blue jerseys and white pants. And then maybe one time I said, white trousers. And one time maybe I said white knickers. I mean, I think I used all kinds of different terminology to describe the pants instead of just saying pants. And one time I said Titans are wearing, white jerseys with navy blue breeches. And for some reason, that just kind of took off. I mean, everybody loved the breeches. Some people thought, okay, who's this redneck from the South using breeches? I haven't heard that word. It's just, my great grandfather used it back in the 1950s or whatever. So, some people thought it was funny. Other people kind of made fun of it, but it just, it generated a little bit of buzz. I could tell that on Twitter. And we can have a whole conversation about how much Twitter's changed the job as well. But Twitter, it kind of took off on social media. And when I did that, so I kind of stuck with the breeches. And then it came a little bit, and people were anticipating what days it coming out. And so I would pair photos with it. And it just kind of took off. And people, kind of get hype about what the team is wearing, Some people love it when I love the selection. Other people hate it. You're never going to get 100%. I love the teams wearing this.
Right.
Or, other people say, well, I hate that look. That's my least favorite look. But you always get some kind of interaction or some kind of response. So, yeah, at some point, I'm lucky the team didn't, I guess the team could have looked at it and said, hey, we're the team account ought to be putting this out. This is a big hit. We should be doing this on the team account, not Jim Wyatt, the writer. He's got 1/10 of the following that the team does, but they kind of let it be my deal. And yeah, they now let me break it each week. And then they put out sometime, within a couple of hours, their own kind of graphic that says Jim Wyatt's Britches Report and kind of reveals it in a fancier fashion than my old school way of doing it. But it is funny. Yeah, I'll write a lot of stuff and do a lot of work. And a lot of times I'll see people out in public and say, man, they don't say I love I get people say I appreciate your writing or I enjoy reading this. But more times than not, it's, man, I love the Britches Report. And so it's pretty funny.
Yeah. It's interesting. You mentioned Twitter and you mentioned just how social media has kind of changed your, I guess, nuance of how you do your job. And I just find that interesting because it's almost like the old school way of just writing print and paper now has to transition with the new evolution of social media and such. Like, how are you able to kind of keep up with, the program, I guess the best way to put it?
Well, it's definitely changed. I mean, for Twitter, I think I got my Twitter account in 2009. That kind of speaks to when everything really started to change in my business. When I first started working for the newspaper, you would write for the next day. And when I was covering the Titans, you'd write, you do your reporting throughout the day. And you'd write a story for the next day's paper. You had 3 different deadlines. A lot of people don't realize that, but the deadlines at the newspaper where you had like a state edition, and that deadline was like 10 o'clock at night. You had to have your copy in by 10 because the paper was gonna get shipped off to Knoxville or Memphis or Jackson, Tennessee. So you had to have your story. If you're covering a game, it was a night game, and that game ended at 9:50. You better get your story in at 9:55 if it was gonna make the paper. And you had newspaper editors hounding you. Where's the story? You got to get the story in. So you had a 10 state edition. You had a city edition that you had maybe to 11:30 that you had to get your stories in by. Then you had what's called a catch plate edition, which was the drop dead time, where you could swap out certain pages that they would let you swap out. You couldn't swap out the whole page, but you had a little bit longer deadline. But you were working to make those deadlines to make the next day's paper. And if you didn't get it in there in time, people are not going to see it. But that was your mindset. Okay, I got to get this in for the next day's paper. You'd write a story, and that's it. Then the internet came along, and you started writing for the web, and it was slow to start off. Some people used it, some people didn't, but if you had a breaking news story, you had to get it up on the website as fast as possible. That started happening, I guess, probably in the 2000s, early 2000s. Twitter came along in 2009, and it completely changed the job because everything, it was always a kind of a life-consuming job covering an NFL team. But then when Twitter came along, it's really 24/7 because, when you found out news or you had information, you had to get it out there as quick as possible, or somebody else was going to beat you to the punch. And
right.
You got the Adam Schefters of the world and the Ian Rappaports, Tom Pelisseros, and, national writers who are trying to get stories on your beat. So, for me, I was a hardcore newspaper guy. My main priority when I was covering the team for the Tennessean was to break all the news, to get all these stories first. I felt like if you're covering the Tennessean, covering the Tennessee Titans for the Nashville Tennessean, you should be breaking all the stories. Not Adam Schefter, not Ian Rappaport, not Tom Pelissero, not these national guys. You have got a job, one of 32 in the league. You should be telling people what's happening on your team. And that's whether guys are getting cut, whether they're getting fired, whether they've got an ACL, an MCL, whether they've got guys are coming in on a free agency visit, who's the team drafting, who's coming in for a tryout, what assistant coaches get fired, who's at the airport coming in, you got to get your first interview with them. So you've got to not only be first on that stuff, but you on social media and Twitter, you have to get it out there as quick as possible. And you're living in fear that somebody else is going to beat you to the punch. So, it was a great job covering the team before the days of Twitter. When Twitter came along, it became even more of a grind. And, you're You're constantly trying to get news out there first. You're constantly worried somebody else is going to scoop you on something. And then of course you got Instagram and you got Facebook and you've got all these other apps that you're trying to feed the public information in as timely manner as possible. And it really became kind of a life consuming job for me when Twitter came along. And some of it I love. And I love that people are so interactive on there. I love that you can get news out quick. If you're a beat guy that's consumed about trying to get the news first, if you put it out there on Twitter that, Chris Johnson is getting released or that, Vince Young has been released or that Mike Munchak has been hired or that, I go down the list of all these different stories, but you get it out there first and everybody knows who had it. There's no, look at the time stamp on there. You know who broke that story. And that was how I was consumed trying to get all those stories. And you can run yourself to the ground doing that. But that's kind of how Twitter is now. People, everybody competing for stories and just got to get it out there as quickly as possible. Again, in the job that I have now, working for the team, I don't consider myself quote unquote breaking stories. I put stories out there when the team's ready for them to be released. You got other people in the market that are competing to get these stories, but my job is still very stressful and very demanding and very time is of great importance. You don't want to be behind on getting your stories out there, and you get your stories out there by tweeting out links on Twitter and putting videos out on Twitter. You do it on Instagram, you do it on Facebook. So it's just a 24/7, 365-day cycle that everyone kind of lives by now. And if you're covering an NFL team, it's you better not step away from your phone or your computer for more than 15 minutes or you'd be embarrassed because a story's going to be old by the time you catch up to it.
Exactly. Well, Jim, we're going to get more into this. We're going to take a quick break and we'll be back with more with Jim Wyatt. Ladies and gentlemen, welcome back to the Nick Frazier Podcast. After that quick break, I'm alongside Jim Wyatt via video call in this wonderful podcast episode. We're talking a little bit about, how Twitter has changed your, industry with print writing. And now it's like you got to be as quick as possible to the next information that gets out there. And you have to post it to a website or a blog or social media. In this case, like, obviously it's changed a lot of things for you, but it's also brought a lot of cool things to go along with your job. You're posting stuff recently you posted stuff at the Super Bowl. You're posting Bridges reports with the Titans media team. And so there are a lot of fun pluses to all that stuff, but obviously you can throw a wrench in things. Obviously you mentioned, it's a 365-day type of job and stuff like that. But, let's just get into it just for a little bit. You're headed to the combine. Is there anything that you like to cover stories on, especially at the combine? Are there like specific stuff you like to talk about or no?
Yeah, you went out there for a second. I'm going through the mountains here on the way to the combine, so I hope you can hear me okay. Tuesday combine is a busy day for the Titans to speak media for the first time, publicly since since the Senior Bowl, I guess. I was with him in Mobile, and I know some of our people, Mike Keith talked to him at the press conference since he was introduced back in January. So Rand Carthon will talk in Indy along with a lot of other GMs and head coaches on Tuesday, and Wednesday is the way that works there. They try to get the GMs, the head coaches out of the way before the prospects start coming in. So Rand talks to Nick Vrabel is to talk to, maybe potentially have some other Titans officials talk up there as well, and then the prospects coming in. And when I tell people that I'm going to the combine, and I've been going to these for 20 years now, I think a lot of people think, you're just going to be sitting in Lucas Oil Stadium watching 40 and watching these guys do the 3-cone drill and and vertical. But and you see some of that. You have an option to go in and watch some of that stuff. But the biggest reason that I go, and a lot of reporters go, is just because of the access that you get. And not only do, in most cases, the head coach and the GM talk, not all of them do, but it's a chance for reporters to get to see their decision makers and ask them questions. But it's also a chance, to talk all these days, certain mornings set aside for when they will come into, the convention center there and conduct interviews. And so Bryce Young will do his thing, and so Will Anderson and all the 7 Tennessee prospects there and 300 plus prospects will you'll get a chance to interview these guys. Some of them will be on a podium, some of them will be at a table, but it's great access, and that's really why I go, and that's why most people go. And you'll have NFL Network and ESPN and writers for all 32 teams and people for all 32 media markets, and agents are here. It used to be when I worked for the Tennessean, the combine was a big opportunity to try to track down some of these agents who sometimes don't return your calls if you're trying to figure out, what's going on with contracts for certain players. You can find them in Indy. There's certain establishments, NFL officials will go to, and you can a lot of times find people in there, but it's just kind of a potpourri of executives and agents and media and prospects all gathered in one place. And it's a whirlwind week, but a very beneficial one if you're covering the NFL.
Yeah, absolutely. I've realized this in the last year or so, maybe 2 years, since you've been kind of posting stuff on social media when you go to events like this. Recently, Ugo Amadi signed with Kansas City Chiefs. He's an Overton product here in Nashville. Is that pretty cool to see, like, guys like from the Nashville area that you get to possibly cover at the combine or something like that? Is it neat to kind of give them a little taste of home, even though from a reporter's perspective?
It is. It's funny you mentioned Ugo because I remember seeing him at the combine. A lot of these guys I've covered the Titans for a long time, and a lot of these kids that are from Nashville, whether it's Ugo or whether it's Dawson Knox or, you name it. There's been so many players that have kind of come up through the Nashville area that have made it to, get college scholarships, played in college, and made it to the pros. And I remember when I first met Ugo was at the combine. He was just finished his career at Oregon, and he was at a table, and I kind of saddled up next to him and told him who it was. And he's like, "Oh yeah, I know who you are. You cover the Titans." And he was a Titans fan. He followed me on Twitter, and then so to see him there, and then have him come to the Titans this year, which was cool because I had a little bit of a relationship with him from our first meeting there. Then I saw he went to Kansas City. The Titans playing in Kansas City this year, just about a week after he was released by the Titans. I saw him in the hallway underneath Arrowhead Stadium. I saw him there. And then I was at the Super Bowl, and that Super Bowl media day, I saw him there, and we chatted again. So it is cool for me to see these Nashville products, kind of enter the next step. And if you've made it to the combine, you're doing something right. And there have been a lot of different occasions where, kids that I remember watching excel in high school or made Tennessee Titans Mr. Football Award winners that go into college and they're successful, and then they go to the NFL and be successful. And it is neat for me to kind of track those guys. Like whenever I go to events, I probably still got the Tennessean mindset, but I still feel like they're, one of our own. If I'm covering the Titans, in Nashville, I feel like the local products are our products to some degree. So I always try to track down those guys, give them some extra attention, and it is neat to see them be successful.
Do you think it makes your job a little bit easier when you see a guy that's a Nashville product or somebody that has a connection to the, I guess, Nashville scene of it all? Does it make your job easier with writing something like a storyline or something of that nature?
Yeah, I mean, I think it. I'm certainly more familiar with them, and I also, you know that people in Nashville appreciate it. I mean, you know, yeah, I'll cover some of these top prospects. What's the crazy thing about the draft is that, you know, Titans pick 11th. You know, no one knows what's going to happen right now between picks 1 and 10. So it's hard to really forecast who the Titans would even have a chance to get. And then when you get to the second round, you get to the third round picks. You know, right now, no, Ryan Carthon could tell you who he's picking in this draft, and it's always the case. So a lot of times you'll write stories about some of these top prospects, and you don't know where they're going to end up. A lot of Titans fans may hope this guy ends up with the Titans, but their odds of that happening sometimes aren't great. If you're writing about a local kid, then back in town that that player has a following, and they appreciate somebody showing them some attention. And I think the prospect appreciates somebody with the hometown, NFL team is giving them a little bit of love on the website. It doesn't mean the Titans are picking them, but it does mean that we kind of embrace people from the Nashville area or from the state of Tennessee. That's always how I've kind of approached it. And a lot of times I've covered events that the Tennessean is not there. So if I'm not writing about them, no one else is. And so I've kind of taken it upon myself to try to find as many of these local ties as I can.
Yeah, I honestly appreciate that from being a native perspective that I mentioned a lot already in this episode, but it goes a long way. And, somebody on my podcast that I had, I'd say about 2-3 years ago, his name is Hayden Kaufman. He's a country music artist. And he had a saying that his dad told me. My dad told me this too. It goes, you never know who's watching because, they could somehow get you to your next big break or something. So like the stories that you're kind of connecting from a Nashville player to the NFL, like, you never know who's reading or following that storyline because it can kind of lead you to another perspective. You know what I mean?
Yeah, and I think whether it's Ugo, who, as you mentioned, went to Overton, he's got players that are there at that school now who he can point to and say, look at Ugo Amadi, who played here on the same field in Nashville, is now at the combine and bringing attention to John Overton High School. And I think people appreciate it. I know, I think that I mentioned earlier, about how, when I used to cover high school sports, they loved seeing you there when you're the media. They give you could walk, I could stand next to the head coach on a Friday night, in between the quarterback and the tight end, taking notes with my notepad. And when the game ends, I can grab these guys and have full access to everything. When you're in the NFL or college, you'll lose some of that because they're not always happy to see you.
Yeah.
There are restrictions you have to deal with, and people look a certain way at the media and maybe don't trust you as much. But I think that if you're giving love to the local kids, I think it still goes a long way, and I think they always appreciate it, whether it's their families or coaches or teammates.
Hey, I definitely agree with you there. Now, you mentioned you're on your way to the combine. Do they ever have like a sports reporter or a journalist 40 time? Like, you ever done a 40 time yet?
Yeah, but they time those with the hourglass. Yeah, so that's why they need one of those from me. I don't need me to time me in the 40 to make me look bad. I'd probably pull a hamstring doing it. So luckily they don't have a media combine. The Titans did years ago have kind of a Titans media mini camp where they invited all of the people who cover the team to go through a film session and go through on the field workouts. And I think there were probably 2 or 3 guys that really did get hurt that day, got the hamstrings or hurt Achilles or pulled a quad. So that was a one and done deal. I don't think they wanted the liability after that event, and I'm sure the combine doesn't want a bunch of old sports writers out there getting hurt.
Did that give you a new perspective on how you do your job when they invited all the media people to do some sort of miniature combine at the sports park?
Yeah, I thought that was cool. I mean, it certainly, you learn more about the game and the X's and O's and what an X receiver's doing, what a Y, what a Z. And I think part of the reason the team did it, this is many years ago. I mean, this has probably been 15 years ago when that happened. But I think part of the reason why, the Titans wanted to do it, I think was, I think Jeff Fisher was the coach at the time. I think, Robbie Bourne would have been the team's media relations director. And I think they wanted to, obviously give you a little bit more insight about what players and coaches deal with. But it also was an opportunity to kind of educate people a little bit more about the game and the ins and outs, and why sometimes if you've got a receiver who breaks free and catches a ball 20 yards behind the closest defender, 20 yards behind the closest defender, goes for a touchdown. Maybe it's not always the cornerback on that spot. Maybe the safety had some responsibility. I think it was a way for them to educate more about, other things to look for in film study about, not that they're looking to try to figure out who's to blame when something goes wrong, but at least give you a different way of looking at things, whether a receiver's running the wrong route, and that's why a quarterback throws an interception. Again, whether a safety misses an assignment and leads to a cornerback looking bad when it really wasn't his fault, whether or not, an offensive lineman, looks like he gave up a blatant sack when the reality is he might have been passing off a guy to somebody else who didn't follow through with his assignment. I think it was a way for you to get a different perspective on the game by doing that. And I always remember that as being helpful. And I think anybody else that was maybe involved in that probably had the same opinion.
Yeah, no, I agree. Growing up, in the Nashville area, going to Ryan and playing football and playing soccer and baseball and all the above, when you're a kid, you play every sport, but, it really gives you a better perspective on, if you're getting into this type of industry, knowing the X's and O's, kind of knowing, what's next, what should be anticipated for a good story or so forth. Because I feel like that's kind of a lot of people that cover sports that really truly think they're covering sports don't really get the true essence of the game until they actually I don't want to say have played it, because some people can't play the sport, but some people need to know the behind the scenes of it. So like having that little miniature combat, I feel like was a huge benefit for everybody.
Yeah, I think so. And I do think, it's good for people to do their homework and to ask the questions and to dig a little deeper on Sundays whenever, certain plays are in question, So that's a part of it. But then, I think, obviously having a knowledge of the game gives you a better idea of what to look for. I mean, I do think sometimes, whether it's players or coaches, it's some kind of a below the belt insult when they want to call out media or call out reporters. Well, this guy didn't play the game. He doesn't know what he's talking about. Because I don't think you don't have to play the game at a high level to be able to cover it and write with authority on it. I certainly was not a star on the football field. I played at St. Henry's a couple of years and broke my arm making a tackle. I was 5'4", 110 pounds when I started my senior year in high school, so I certainly wasn't going to be a high school football star playing college, but I always at least tried to educate myself on the game. And I think most people that, every once in a while you'll find Teron Davenport works for ESPN. He played ball in college. He's probably he's the best X and O's guy this market's probably ever had, as far as, knowing the game and knowing the X's and O's. Not everybody has that background, and you just have to try to be as good at your job and take it seriously, and not just do it flippantly, where you're just criticizing things that you don't know what you're talking about. And that's where I see where young reporters and even veteran reporters will make the biggest mistakes, is they just assume something based on what they see. They either don't know, they don't find out, and then the wrong person gets the blame put on him. So I think you can approach it all in different ways, and I think the biggest thing is just know as much about the game as possible.
I agree. Now, Jim, I'm gonna ask you 2 Titans questions. The first one is, you got any hints towards certain players that might be looked at or might be in your next mailbag by chance?
Well, the mailbag, it seems like all the questions right now are about the draft, about Ryan Tannehill, about Derrick Henry, about some of the players that were just let go. I always tell people, in February that, it's a long haul to the draft, and you got to get through free agency to really have an idea about who the team might go after in the draft. And right now the Titans are in a little bit of a transition period, and with a new GM, a new offensive coordinator, obviously a new way of thinking and approaching things. So there's a lot of uncertainty in a lot of positions, and it's hard to really say what's going to happen now. I definitely can't go down the road of telling you any free agents the team, might be going after, because since I work for the team now, I could get in trouble with tampering. Yeah, that's different than when I was working in Tennessee, and where I used to dig, and I can tell you maybe with you talking to sources, maybe who this guy might be going after, this guy might be going after that guy. Actually, that's one of the biggest differences between my job now and my job then, is I actually know stuff that I can't say, and which is people sometimes might think, well, this guy not giving up any information here, and some of that's by design.
Exactly.
Because if somebody's telling me something privately, if I tell it publicly, then I'm not going to be working with a team anymore.
Exactly. No, I was just kind of poking at the bear a little bit, just to have a little fun. But my second question I was going to ask you, working for the team, and you obviously build relationships with players. Now, what is it for you? Do you ever get starstruck? Like when you first started working for the team, did you ever get starstruck for, the athletes that were on the field, or it just came natural to you?
Yeah, I mean, I think I was more because I had the background to cover some high schools, to cover some college, that, this was different. I mean, and I knew it was different. And, all of a sudden you go from covering, kids in the Clinic Bowl to now covering, and that's kind of what happened for me. My last year of covering high school sports, I covered the Clinic, which was the state championships in high school, and actually Father Ryan beat the NBA that year. It was 1998, and then the next year I'm covering the Super Bowl, and which was crazy. But yeah, it's different, and so I'm going from covering high school kids to covering Eddie George and Steve McNair and Frank Wycheck and Javon Curse and Bruce Matthews, and some of these guys have been in the league for several years, and here I am showing up with, I look like I'm fresh out of college, because I always looked a lot younger than I actually was at those time. And I was rocking the Bama bangs and a mullet, and probably didn't know the NFL like a lot of other people then. So I wasn't starstruck. I was more nervous. I didn't want to make a fool out of myself with these guys. But you just gotta be around there, and that's one thing I always tell people. I think people respect you more if you're. In some jobs you can't do that. It's just not your job description to be there every day. But
exactly,
I think people are a little bit more understanding of you, and when you criticize them or when you're writing about them, if you're there every day and can kind of prove yourself. Like if I'm gonna write a story about criticizing a guy, and then not show up for 2 weeks, that's kind of a cowardly move. But if you're writing a story and then you're showing up the next day, or if a guy wants to yell at you in his locker, you can do that. But I wasn't starstruck. I was more just wanting to make sure I was trying to be respectful, trying to know what I was talking about, and didn't want to waste this guy's time. And then the more I was around there, the more, the more they knew me, the more they kind of were on the same page, and it just was very natural. And after covering guys like Eddie George and Steve Nair and and some of those guys I mentioned earlier. I mean, it was easy after that. I wasn't starstruck really by anybody.
Yeah. I had on a guest previously on my podcast, another one. His name is Scott Meyer. He actually played football at Alabama for, I think, 2 to 3 years, and then he ended up transferring to Vanderbilt. And I asked him, I was like, what was the big difference between, playing at Alabama and then playing at Vanderbilt? Like, did you ever get starstruck when you were recruited by Vandy to play? He goes, no, not really. Like, that's the expectation. Like, if you come in there with a professional attitude, like, you're going to come out as a professional. So that's kind of what he got out of it. And then when he moved over to Vandy, transferred to Vandy, this was before the NIL, before all that, transfer portal stuff. He had to graduate before he could transfer. And so he told me, because I asked him, I was like, was anybody starstruck by you going to Vandy? He goes, they weren't really starstruck, but they were more of just asking for questions, like what's different from the coaching style at Alabama to the coaching style at Vanderbilt? Like, how can they improve and stuff like that? I found that interesting. I kind of ask that question all the time to people in this industry or in a certain sport, because some people have said yes, like, yeah, I was kind of starstruck. I was fanboying or fangirling to whoever was out there on the field or ice or rink, whatever. So I always think it's an interesting question to ask.
Yeah, and I think it's one thing where I was lucky that I had good mentors or people that kind of took me under their wing, is that, I've seen people come in, whether it's after a game or covering the team, come in the locker room for the first time, and I don't know, I've actually seen people try to take a picture with a player or get an autograph, or, hey, can you sign this for my kid? I mean, that's a big no-no. I mean, you got to develop a working relationship with these people, and can't put them on a pedestal. There's just got to be mutual respect there, and you got to respect their time. You got to respect, their opinions. You got to treat them well, like I said, and you can't be looking at somebody like they're a star or they're untouchable, and then you're writing a game about them and writing a story about them, and you got to offer a fair critique of how they played. I mean, you got to be
right.
You got to kind of tell it like it is, and you can't do that if you're blinded by, their stardom. So it was never really like that for me. And again, I'd give credit to the people who I worked under, as they made that clear, as, hey, this is a job. This is not a hobby. This is not, something you do to you get some autographs or say you hung out with Eddie George. I mean, you're there to work, and you're there to not just be there for that day, but to be there for the next week and for the next, season and for years to come. And that's, I see Eddie now. Eddie didn't know me from the man in the moon when I came rolling in there in '99, but he always treated me well. And here I see him now, 20, 22, 23, 24 years later, however long it's been, and got a great relationship with Eddie George, and I have so much respect for him, and he remembers me when I was just starting out, and it's just crazy how kind of time flies, and how these players now, some of the players I covered my first years with the Titans now had kids playing in the NFL, which is just crazy to me.
Right. Yeah, no, I agree with you there, Jim, because people to today's date, thinking about it, there's a time and place to do stuff like that, to be, affected by the stardom, because like you said, it's a job. Like, yeah, it's cool to work in sports, but there is a criteria that goes along with it. You got to make sure you're professional about your work and go along for the ride with it. But like you said, there's definitely a time and place for it elsewhere.
Yeah, and the reality is, I mean, it's different. Again, my job is completely different now than it was my first 15 years covering the team. And now that I work for the team, I want the team to do well. I've got, my relationships with some of these guys are different now because we're on the same team. I want, not that I ever didn't want people to do well that I was covering, but obviously I want the Titans to win now and want guys to have success. And they trust me now because I'm in the building, and they know I'm not going to burn them on stuff. But when I'm covering the Titans for the Tennessean, I wasn't a fan of the Titans. I mean, that's what people, I think, sometimes, are critical of people in the media that cover the team, whether it's again Teron Davenport or Teresa Walker or Buck Rising or Sam Phelan or Terry McCormick or John Glennon or David McClear, all these people that are around. Kowarski, I don't know if I mentioned him. I mean, these people are not fans of the Titans. I mean, they're not supposed to be fans of the Titans. To cover the team, to give an unbiased opinion of how the team's playing, how players are performing, how a coach is handling things on Sundays, how the GM is doing in acquiring talent. And they're not in the press box. At least they're not. I never was in the press box, clapping my hands or rooting for the Titans to make a game-winning field goal at the end. I was there trying to do my job and to be fair and balanced and trying to get my story out before deadline and write, do interviews in a respectful manner. And if the team won, then the fans were excited about it. If the team lost, and you write the story and you move on to the next one. I had family members that were upset when the Titans would lose, because I remember I mentioned that my wife and kids go to the games. My father's been a season ticket member, from the time that stadium opened up. They all love the Titans. But when I was working for the Tennessean, I wasn't a fan of the team. I used to do picks of the Titans. I'd pick games, every Sunday morning. I'd have, Titans 20, Steelers 17 was my prediction that day. Or I'd have, Steelers 24, Titans 20. And people would get mad at me, like, how could you not pick the Titans to win this game? And I wasn't doing it as a fan. I was doing it as a reporter, trying to be objective and not partial. And I think that's what people don't sometimes lose sight of is, I noticed on social media or Twitter where people are calling out reporters for not supporting the team or writing something critical of the team. That's kind of their job. Their job is not to be a fanboy or to be trying to root for them. And that's one thing that, again, changed with my job. But I don't know that everybody really understands that part of it.
Yeah. Well, this is one thing you probably can fanboy about. It's this next segment on the podcast called Meals with Meatball. There are two lists: Tennessee Tasties, Nashville Nasties. Tennessee Tasties, you get three places that you love here in the Nashville or Tennessee area. Which of the other? I know you're on the road a lot, so you can give a celebrity pick if you want. But give me your top three places here in the Nashville area you really enjoy eating at.
Well, I'm not going to give you real fancy places because I usually don't eat a lot of fancy places in town. I sometimes, eat at some different restaurants on the road when I'm in different towns. When I'm in Nashville, I usually go out with the family. My wife and I and kids love going to Rose Peppers over in East Nashville. Great Mexican food. That's one of my favorites. I think it's on Eastland in East Nashville, and love Rose Peppers. I love, this is old school here, and this is not fancy at all, but I love going to Satco, which is saying people from Nashville know what Satco is. Other people not from Nashville think it's San Antonio Taco Company, which is an old dive off over by Vanderbilt that's been there forever. Love going to Satco, eating outside underneath the trees. And then I'm a big fan of, because my wife doesn't like it, so if you catch me going through a takeout at Payway in Brentwood, those are the places. If I had three places to eat, it would probably be Rose Peppers, Satco, or maybe pick up a little takeout at Payway would do the trick for me. Now I know, if I had a bigger budget, I'd probably, Southern Oyster and Steakhouse is a great place. I've eaten there twice. Usually it's for a special occasion. I'm not going to list that as one of my top three because people think I'm a regular. I hear Kane Prime and some of the. I could tell you a lot of other places that I've heard are great. But a lot of them I don't frequent because I'm usually looking to save a little money. Now, if we're talking out of town, in Baltimore, Jimmy's famous seafood has got the best crab cakes, I think, in Baltimore. I always love going to Baltimore because I love crab cakes. When I'm out in Los Angeles, whether it's covering the Rams, I always go to Killer Shrimp out in Marina Del Rey. I could probably give you a different spot, and Joe's Crab House, not Joe's Crab Shop, but Joe's Stone Crab down in Miami is a great place to get some big stone crab. I can give you a lot of out-of-town restaurants because I've discovered those over the years.
Yeah, I'm sure of it. I mean, you're on the road almost 24/7 is what it sounds like. And man, it seems like your palate is well trained. Is that a good way to put it?
I would say so. I'm not extravagant with some of the restaurants I go to. Like the famous place in Indianapolis is St. Elmo's. But you go and eat at St. Elmo's, you're gonna walk out with a $120 bill.
Yeah.
By the time you get the shrimp cocktail and the steak dinner and a drink, I usually I have never been to St. Elmo's Steakhouse, and everybody else will tell you it's the best place to eat in Indianapolis because I got an expense report I got to deal with. I'd rather save my money using on something else and eat at Harry and Izzy's, which is a good spot in Indy, or go to. There's a great place, Iaria's, and the best place I eat in Indy is Iaria's, which is an Italian place on College Street in Indianapolis. I'm sure I'll eat there at least once while I'm up there. That you can get out of there for $20-$25.
Hey, that's my kind of eating right there, Jim.
I used to have some manicotti. I don't know if that's on the menu anymore, but got some good lasagna, chicken parmesan.
Hey, Jim, if you ever come around this area where I'm recording at, let me know because I think my grandparents had a restaurant off Thompson Lane called Lorenzo's, and there's still food being made in the kitchen, if you know what I mean. I mean, I help out every now and then, so if you ever want some good lasagna or chicken parm, just let me know. They closed when I was born, so that was the kind of the thing.
Oh,
so
okay.
Yeah, so it closed around 98 or so.
You know some of the secret recipes.
Indeed. Hey, they're all up here, all up in the noggin.
That sounds pretty good. So yeah, I do try to get out and have some good meals when I'm on the road. But and that's one cool part about it. No matter where you go, but like I love going to Houston because you can eat at Ninfa's or you go to Papacitas or Papa Do's. One of them's a Cajun place. One of them is Mexican. Been to all these cities now that I usually know the place to go, or somebody's giving me recommendations of where to go. So my restaurant recommendations, to be honest with you, are better outside of Nashville than they are in Nashville because I always end up going to the same spots.
Ladies and gentlemen, we're back. Cut off there a little bit, but Jim was talking about some great places to eat outside of the Nashville area. I mean, he's on the road 365 days a year just about, and man, it's almost like you could make a story out of just all the places you've eaten outside of Tennessee.
Yeah, it's definitely one of the side perks of the job is you get to try some different cuisine and try some different restaurants. So I do enjoy it. And this is a busy time. Usually the road trips in the fall are quick. You leave on a Saturday, you're back in Nashville on Sunday night. At least now that I work with a team, it's on the team plane. I'm in and out. It's a lot quicker. But some of these trips during the off season gone for longer periods of time. So yeah, I have been to a lot of restaurants outside of Nashville and different cities. Can definitely give you some good tips and a lot of places.
Oh yeah. Well, Jim, the last thing I'll tell you about a recommendation here in Nashville, Big Al's, I think Kitchen and Deli is what it's called, off Coffee Street. Probably one of the best restaurants you'll go to. It's interesting because it's in like a neighborhood area, and you got to park on the side of the street, and you're walking in, and man, it's probably some of the best jerk chicken you'll ever have.
Okay, I'll have to check that out. Yeah, Big Owls, huh?
Highly recommend it. And so, yeah, Jim, greatly appreciate you coming on. Any last words you want to tell anybody that listens and follows your content?
Yeah, I appreciate everybody following. I guess the best way to get me is at Jay Wyatt on Twitter, at Jay Wyatt on Instagram, Facebook. They've got a cap for some reason on how many people can follow you on that. I put all my stories on there, and then the Titans, TennesseeTitans.com is where you can find my stuff. Mike Keith, Amy Wells with the team do a great job with the OTP, with the team's podcast, and our video team does a lot of great work. Got a good photographer, Donald Page, who puts out a lot of great content for the website. So, TennesseeTitans.com is where you can find my stuff on a regular basis, and hopefully this Titan season in 2023 will be better than the one in 2022.
Hopefully it ends with Uncle Lombardi on Broadway.
Yeah, that would be nice.
There you go. Well,
Take
Jim,
Uncle Lombardi down to Big Owl's and have some jerk chicken.
there you go. Exactly. Well, Jim, I greatly appreciate you coming on, and safe travels on your way to the combine and on the way back. And we'll see you back here in Nashville.
Okay, appreciate it. Thanks for having me on.
Thanks, Jim. Appreciate you.